I think I will mention that we were going to do astrology, but Diane, what's her damn name?
Not Nancy.
Nancy Pelosi fucked our plans up to do an actual fun episode.
You're dinosaurs.
It's okay. I'm actually kind of glad because
I have to give you time.
I feel good, but I had a horrible accident last night at jiu-jitsu.
What?
I can't walk. So I feel like I'm not at my like peak to lead an astrology session.
What happened?
All right.
Oh, I was just, somebody was coming down on just a takedown, and she just like slammed down like her whole body weight and it just landed right on my foot. And now I can't walk.
Oh my God.
Welcome to What's Left, a weekly political discussion challenging the mainstream left. I'm Eduardo Barca with co-host, teacher and socialist Andy Lipson, right-wing teacher Jessica, and community organizing socialist Kenny Cepeda. We're online at what-s-left.whatnot.com. You can find that link to our blog in the episode notes. You can also find our personal social media handles as at Don Eduardo Barca for Instagram, and Kenny's Instagram at ZepDKE, and Jessica's Twitter handle at JHomie89, and we'll post that in the episode notes. Please subscribe, rate, review, turn on your notifications, and share your favorite episode where we found this episode. Thank you. And one more thing to mention. For folks interested in anything that I'm doing here in Colombia and abroad, I will start my own channel and I will leave the link to my channel in the episode notes as well. I will be following some of my friends' migration as they're trying to go up north and share their stories, and possibly share other things and anything else some of the audience might request. Thank you. Right. So today we'll be discussing the recent events that are happening as it relates to China, Taiwan, and everything in between there, right? The relationships, and we're moving away from like the Ukrainian war to now it seems to like another attack. It seems to be, and we'll discuss what we think about it. Andy, you decided to show up with this topic because we were going to discuss something differently. Maybe you can start off with why you decided to pick this topic.
Yeah, I mean, we've had some pretty heavy episodes over the last 3 weeks, and Jessica, I didn't know this about Jessica, but she's like knows astrology. I think you did a workshop about astrology. Is that what you said? Or yeah, workshops, and
yeah.
You've had experience of doing that. So we were really going to actually go into that this week, but then Nancy Pelosi decided to do her little dance over to Taiwan, and it was just like all the stuff that was taking place around it and the hubbub. Again, as Kenny has said before, once these stories are in front of you, you have to ask yourself, why is this story being thrown in front of our faces? But I really did want to discuss with you all, what do you make of all this stuff that's going on? And even the thing that Eduardo kind of get at is the center of axis of shifting from Ukraine to China and Taiwan. You know, that in itself is a statement of what's going on. That Eduardo, I know you didn't set on it, but that's the kind of stuff I want to talk about. Do people want me to give as my best summary of what I can say is going on? And then I really would like to hear other people just kind of add in and see what I'm not going to try to be exhaustive, but I'll just say the big ones to me. Does that work? Okay. So here's what are some of the things I think I know. First off, Nancy Pelosi scheduled a trip to go to Taiwan. And it's been stated that there hasn't been full agreement by the U.S., like the Biden administration didn't necessarily give her permission. They didn't say she couldn't go, but they didn't say she should go. So it's been posed as Nancy Pelosi's kind of trip to China, and I mean to Taiwan. And of course, the U.S. has recently talked about arming Taiwan. There's been articles basically saying the U.S. is trying to turn Taiwan into the next Ukraine for themselves. But all we know is that Nancy Pelosi, who has some, her and her husband have investments in chips and things like that. is going to Taiwan, which is a major supplier of chips for the United States. And China immediately took that as threatening its sovereignty, because both China and the United States agree that there is one China, and that one China seems to include Taiwan. And so China and the United States aren't getting along these days. And China basically said, we see this kind of action as a direct threat to our sovereignty, because you didn't get permission from us to do it. And so, the thing was escalating. China said, you're going to regret this. They used all sorts of language. They started war games prior to her flight. The actual stop at Taiwan in terms of her Asian flight wasn't even listed on her agenda, but lo and behold, she does actually land in Taiwan a day or two, like 2 days ago. Stayed about 18 hours, talked with all the various bigwigs, made a hubbub of basically, look, you can't back us off, you can't bully us. And that was how the U.S., Congress put it. That's how, and I thought the mainstream media mostly took it as, we can't allow the Chinese to determine what U.S. senators and U.S. congresspeople, they have to have the freedom to go where they choose, and we're not going to back down to Chinese bullying. It wasn't clear. Many people worried that when this happened, that there was even talk of like the plane getting shot down or things like that. And of course, people had scenarios of like, this is a massive escalation, could lead to a new nuclear war that starts on the other side of the ocean instead of across the Atlantic with Russia, across the Pacific with China. And her plane was not shot down. She came and went. But since then, essentially, the war games that China has been doing have definitely gone up and escalated. And like if you look at the degree to which the ships are now surrounding it, it's effectively a naval blockade of Taiwan. They've been doing live fire things. They've been doing amphibious maneuvers, parachutes, and I know they've been shooting missiles into the strait, into the ocean there. All of these indicating that and basically saying to Taiwan, you made a big mistake. You are going to pay for this. And that's as much as that has gone on so far. So I guess I'll leave it there. Except to say one other detail, which is some people in the U.S., like this guy Esper, who is a former defense person, and others are now talking about revising the notion that the U.S. adheres to the one China idea. There is talk of that in the Congress of revisiting that and saying, no, we don't accept one China, so-called one China. So that's as much as I know about it.
I decided to look into a little bit of the history of what is the relationship between Taiwan and China. Just for myself, I think it's important for folks to know, because I imagine there will be Taiwanese flags just like Ukrainian flags as part of the liberal left, right? To support independence, to support autonomy, to support in invasion, so to speak, as I imagine it was predicted when Russia was going into Ukraine. And so when I think of this right now, what's happening between Taiwan and China, and the U.S. meddling in, I think of what's the exact support that's going to happen from the left, like the San Francisco left, to do the same with the support of the Taiwanese people. And as I said, for also what happens in Ukraine, I said that I'm not necessarily, as some people thought, in support of Russia going into Ukraine, but I think it's important to put things into perspective or in context. Now, I think that just like we've discussed NATO's involvement and the discussion of that and how that led up to what Russia did afterwards, and everyone's focusing on Russia invasion, and that's all on the mainstream news, instead of focusing on the U.S. relationship and how they provoked as well Russia, and how that's also a part of the provocation for Russia to do what it did to defend itself. I looked into the history of the Chinese government of China and Taiwan, and Taiwan has been a part of China for 200 years before it was seized by imperialists, and those were the consequences of the invasion of the Japanese, and those were backed. The Japanese were backed by other European colonies, and this was in 1895. So the Chinese people have, like, for a while, then this might be, I don't know how this might be taken by folks who listen to this, but Taiwan was, if Taiwan was already a part of China, and the Taiwanese fought for their independence, it was independence from colonized powers like European colonial powers and Japan. And here we're discussing, as Nancy Pelosi has visited, discussing democracy and discussing how there's dictatorships trying to take over Taiwan. And it's like, this is exactly what the US and other European colonial powers did before. So I'm not sure what she's discussing when she's talking about, or what she's trying to say when she's discussing, like, democracy. This is democracy. We're fighting for their democracy. When they were fighting for the democracy at that time, when they were being attacked or being taken over by Japan and backed by US imperialist powers. And so Nancy Pelosi's visit, even though you said that Biden was or the Biden administration was distancing themselves from Nancy Pelosi's visit, they actually had sent aircraft carriers before Nancy Pelosi's visit. So they sent aircraft carriers on the coast of Taiwan with accompanying warships. So I, as I said to you on the phone, Andy, I would say this is, as I said, this is U.S. representation, even though they are distancing themselves from Nancy Pelosi's visit. This is not separate in any way. They could say it in the media as all they want, but this is just in cahoots. I don't see it differently from the U.S. attack or direct involvement, even though they're trying to say it's not.
Yeah, just to pick up on the spreading democracy and the independence struggle thing. I mean, I certainly don't feel like I have a pulse on the Taiwanese population and, like, where most people's heads are at and their political position in terms of their relationship to China. But it's just so frustrating from, like, a narrative control perspective. Like you said about the flags, Eduardo, like, I think you're totally right. And it's just like everybody they wait until they're told, right? Oh, suddenly, as of this week, the Taiwanese people are oppressed and China's coming down on them all of a sudden, right? And it's like, oh, okay. I mean, there might be some truth to that. I don't think China's, like, the goodie or whatever. We've gone over, that before in our previous episodes. But it's like, we're like the Puerto Rican independence supporters in my town. We're like the Scottish independence, like, nobody's thinking for themselves. So I think that's just, like, the first thing that I've been frustrated at looking at, the media and just people's reaction to this, just kind of from the mainstream left mainly. And I don't know, it's just, I think we're all a little jaded after the past few years, but it just feels like, come on, like, we just did this with Ukraine. I think you gave a good summary of kind of what's going on. I don't have a ton to add, Andy, in terms of just, like, facts on the ground as far as we can tell, obviously not being on the ground. I mean, I think on the surface level, like, it's pretty silly, like, just of all people to send to sort of, like, supposedly intimidate China. I mean, I don't know if people have been watching any public appearances by Nancy Pelosi, like, literally anything she's done over the past 6 months, but she can't string together a sentence. She sounds like she's drunk, like, all the time. And it's funny, but it's like, holy shit. And, like, this is who they're sending. I just can't even imagine, like, the laughing stock that the United States must be to foreign leaders and foreign people. So So yeah, I mean, I do want to definitely get into the whole semiconductors chip thing. I'm curious what you guys think about that. I know it was like a week or maybe 2 weeks ago that Pelosi's husband, I mean, they're basically openly doing insider trading with the chip stocks, right? And I know there's been that CHIPS Act that passed in the House and is going forward. Yeah, I'm curious what you guys think in terms of, like, I've seen a lot of headlines that are like supply chain crisis, like another element of the supply chain crisis. And I mean, I know like Taiwan and just Asia in general supplies, like, I think it's like 90 something percent of chips, right? And obviously this technology, like, it's not just for computers, like semiconductors, right? They're used in everything, smartphones and all of the fourth industrial revolution technology, I'm sure. So I don't know. I mean, I feel like I don't have a pulse on, like, is it sort of a controlled supply chain crisis? I mean, probably not entirely. Like, is the US really, like, are they really shaking in their boots in terms of, Google and Apple and whatever, all these tech companies and tech firms? Like, are they really worried about this, or is this, there's been so many aspects of the supply chain, which I feel like we're just experiencing this like controlled demolition of our economy. I mean, globally too, and then of course with the way that the Ukraine situation has affected, more so for Europe than the United States, but the United States too, like the way that that's affected their supply chain. I mean, it seems like pretty much across the board, like every leader is just totally willing to just completely devastate the state of their own economy and their own population's well-being to advance whatever insane World War III advancing moves that they want to do. So anyway, I'd like to definitely at some point maybe hear people's perspective on the whole semiconductor thing. And then, I mean, obviously it's an escalation. I also read, is this right? I read right before getting on here, I saw somebody post that sending Pelosi there for whatever, she was there like a day, 2 days, cost $90 million. Is that right? I mean, that's insane. Like,
Yeah.
Never mind the carbon footprint, right?
She was there definitely less than 1 day. She was there 18 hours, cost $90 million.
Okay, so again, that thing, right? Like, it costs $90 million. You know, that Pelosi doesn't get to choose that by herself. Like the narrative that I've heard a lot is that on one hand, she's a rogue agent, right? Like, she's doing this without the White House permission, right? And it's dangerous, and she's doing this like, crazy thing, right? The other narrative is like, yes, like you said, Lipson, it's time to take it to the Chinese. It's about time to fight those autocratic, evil people that dominate their people and blah, blah, blah. And again, like, just from that $90 million, you don't get fucking to go just by yourself. She doesn't get to go on a whim. She's the third most senior person in the U.S. government, I think. Isn't she the president of the House, right? And so that means that in the chain of command, she's third in line to be, the ruler of this country. If fucking Biden goes down, if Kamala Harris goes down, so she's no little fucking congressman. She is a representative of the U.S. She's the senior most person that has attended Taiwan. It's not the first one. That's not bullshit, because, Trump was sending some people, like the health secretary out of all people. Again, yes, I think you are right, Jessica. You were getting, I think, to the right questions. Is this about semiconductor? Absolutely, to me. It is absolutely. Taiwan represents, at least I read, I don't know how accurate that is. People can look up their own stuff. But Taiwan represents 50% of the production of semiconductors in the world. 50%. And I don't think it's just China. The U.S. that is the consumer. It's also China. So there will be something there, to either fuck up or take over. in order to control the future of the fourth industrial revolution, and also, hinder your opponents. So absolutely, not only is that, but it's also geopolitical. Taiwan is like 150 miles from the Chinese mainland, something like that. So it's basically like Cuba. Cuba is 90 miles from the U.S. Imagine again the missile crisis, right? That we all know about, that we've been taught about, in history, and having weapons, right, that close to the U.S., the fucking crisis and the paranoia it created, right? And we often, like, the media tends to forget that, or portray, quote unquote dictator countries like North Korea as paranoid or like irrational and crazy and deranged, but try having, and this is the same shit that Russia just went through, right? That's what Russia's responding to. Ukraine is right there. NATO has been pushing on their borders, for years, since the fall of the Soviet Union, even though there was an agreement, and there was an agreement with the US and China too. The US and China were actually partners coming out of the Second World War to fight the Russians, to fight the Soviets, not the Russians, the Soviet Union. And so that's what the US agreed to, the one China policy. But right now it's convenient to like fucking redo that and rewrite the rules. So again, like I don't agree with the mainstream narrative that Nancy Pelosi just went there on a whim. I'm not so sure about this fact, or if it's a fact, but I think she went to visit a semiconductor factory. I'm not so sure about that. But again,
I met with like top semiconductor firm people.
What's that?
No, I just think you're totally correct. She did.
And again, that company is called Taiwanese Semiconductor Manufacturing Company. You will hear that if you actually look up, like top manufacturing, semiconductor things. And we've known that there is, quote unquote, a shortage of semiconductors. I don't trust that, just like I don't trust that there is a shortage of coins in this country. We have to ask questions. I don't know fully where I will go with that, the shortage part, but I know for a fact that this was Nancy Pelosi not representing the U.S. government to start some shit. This is a deliberate act. This is not a mistake. This is calculated. This is them, getting on that theater that they know they will have to, attack. And then we can talk later about like the geography and the islands that are actually corralling China on the Pacific in maritime routes. Potentially this is something that happened during the Cold War, that the U.S. tried to corner, the Soviets, by blocking the Pacific with a blockade, essentially. And there is plenty. The Philippines, Borneo, Japan, and now Taiwan. They all, if you connect those dots, you have a relative control of those maritime routes. So this is about all these things. This is about war. This is an act of war. This is not a mistake. This is the U.S. saying, all right, let's get this party started. That's at least what it signals to me.
Just before we get to the geography, like, why do you guys think that they tried to make it, like, why do you think they tried to set up the pretense that like Biden like didn't support it and like the military didn't support it, and it was like, oh, badass Nancy just going off on her, and like what's to be gained from that?
I mean, I think no one wants to go to war, whether you're on the right or on the left, because everyone is afraid of what we've always thought, which is atomic bombs, missiles, nuclear bombs, all of this. And so obviously this is my opinion, like the provocation between China and the USA, if it was to show, just like the USA could not show some direct support, even though it is backing up the Ukrainian government in opposition to Russia, they cannot involve themselves directly. I would think that that's the same thing, because otherwise the public opinion is that no one wants to go to war for World War III. So you have to sort of diplomatically say, we're just not, we're distancing ourselves from Nancy Pelosi. But she is, as Kenny has said, the third highest ranking official. It's a representation. She's to be the president if something were to happen to Kamala Harris and Biden. So it is a full support, but it's subtle, right? It's this support. This is my thinking. I wanted to talk. Well, that's my opinion. I'll let someone else say their opinion why they think. I don't. And I'll just say this, Andy, before you go. I mean, I don't. I'm always afraid every time if we don't have diplomatic relationships with these higher powers, like with these very grandes potencias, high potent countries, that we could go to war. I'm always afraid of that. That's always in my mind. It's always this war mongering. It's just always dangerous to me in my head. It's something I always, when we talk about these things, and I saw the missile attacks today, but those were a prelude to what could happen if the USA gets involved. They were off the shore of Taiwan, right?
Yeah, I probably want to take up where you said. I'm going to try to address Jessica's questions in light of, like Kenny said, a lot of things that got me thinking, because I would agree with a big part of the thrust of what Kenny's saying, and I think there's a slightly different take I have on it, as if you will. I don't think as if it was centrally about semiconductors. And I'll try to get to the. So here's what I think, because I believe, first off, I'll go back to what Eduardo originally said about are they just switching the front from Ukraine to China or to Taiwan, going from Ukraine, Russia to Taiwan, China? And no, what the U.S. is doing is opening up a new front in an existing war. So, and by the way, they are starting another war in Kosovo right now as they try to push. So the U.S. is intentionally creating instability. And this is what they're attempting to do to try to get back into the top of the game. The idea that the world is a multipolar world is terrifying to the United States. And so they're trying to make it back to the unipolar world, and they're going to do it by attempting to destabilize their enemies. And they're doing that in Ukraine, and now they're opening up a new front in that war, in that global war in Taiwan with this. Semiconductors feature as a definite piece in it. China looks at Taiwan as a stationary aircraft carrier in the way that Eduardo was talking about it. It has been used as a launch point to invade China, and so they know we have to control that if we want to, and that's why they're pushing back as they are. But I think the immediate reason for why Pelosi, I think, has to do with the November elections. And I also think it has to do with elections coming up in China, why they're doing this, and what's happening in the Chinese economy. So even though, as I say, that the November elections matter, I still want to say this is an overall press of inter-imperialist rivalry, which is only going to get more dangerous over time. So that's why I do agree with semiconductors. I do agree that's peace, because if the U.S. loses access to Taiwan, that I guarantee you China's going to shut down their access to semiconductors through that avenue if the U.S. does any other provocations. And so the U.S. has to defend this front as a way of saying, no, we're keeping this for ourselves. But the November elections are coming, and I do think the U.S. wanted to change the game and change the discussion. You'll notice that a lot of the Republicans have gotten behind Biden on this, and it's actually, we've gone from a situation where it looked like the Democrats were going to get killed in November to actually having some of their major opponents sing their praises over being tough on China. But I do believe there was nervousness about it. And this is I think China knows this as well, is that they were nervous about making this step. So I think they had to distance themselves and basically say, this is Pelosi, just in case they had to back out, Pelosi could back out so that it wasn't the whole U.S. empire looking like it was weak. So that is what I think, is I think that when they took this move, they were a little nervous about China backing them off. I think China tried to sense that weakness and tried to threaten them in all the different ways. And the U.S. said, I sense you are not going to go for it. We're going to go make our move. Now, so that's how I see it, is that and this is that gamesmanship. It's weakness. It's like the idea of what does the U.S. look like as it leaves Afghanistan in the way it did. It makes you look weak. It does actually make you geopolitically weaker. And so it was about who was going to back down, because what they're trying to do here, and I do think the U.S. actually can make a case at this point that they got over on Xi how do you pronounce his name? Jinping?
Xi Jinping?
Xi Jinping? Is that, can I say it that way?
I'm not so sure, honestly.
Jinping is what I usually hear.
Okay, I'll say it Xi Jinping, something like that.
Look it up, someone, and then I can't do it.
All right, doesn't matter. I'm going to say that dude, the president, Xi Jinping, whatever. I'm just going to, somebody else can correct it later. The Chinese economy is actually having some difficulties. Growth is going down, like the growth in the GDP is going down. There are some bank defaults on stuff that's actually led to massive protests in sections of China, and development of new housing is going down. And the US knows that, and they know that Xi Jinping is actually trying to go for the third term, which historically you don't get a third term. So I do think they're trying to make him look weak in the run-up to that election, and hoping to destabilize the political, the Chinese Communist Party. Because if he can win that election and win it in a landslide, they go forward with this vision of where they're at, where I feel like they're trying, this is actually a move to screw them up over their elections, and at the same time, strengthen Biden's hand in the November elections. That's in my mind, that's the immediate, but the long term is these powers aren't just planning on going to war, they have started going to war, and using proxies. And this isn't a front changing, it's a new front opening up. And it looks like the US strategy is to promote war across the globe to destabilize its enemies, and thinking that they'll come out on top as a result. And I just want to say that I understand what you were saying, Eduardo. No one wants war. We're just talking about people, though. That's humans. We are not talking about politicians. We're not talking about the US ruling class. And we're not talking about the Chinese ruling class. They want war because they want to win. Last thing I'll say, if I was a socialist in China, I would be opposing what China is doing right now with throwing their missiles and things like that. But I'm not. I'm a socialist here, and I call bullshit on my government, doing this war making and war promoting stuff.
Go ahead, Ken. It's Xi Jinping. Yes. Go ahead, Kenny. I was going to say something about. Thank you, Andy, for correcting that. Yeah, I mean people, not the governments. They could care less. It's us, right? The rest of us who are going to be screwed over. Go ahead.
Immediately, I don't think I put enough emphasis on the elections. I do think it makes sense. I do wonder if, was there any real risk, in that, in terms of starting some shit, that could, get a catastrophe going, in that, I guess I'm curious if you have any thoughts on that.
Yeah, I mean, just on that question, I don't know. I mean, I've heard a lot of people framing it that way, like literally they're trying to start World War III. I'm not so sure. I mean, I think maybe long term, sure. But like, did they actually think that China was going to shoot down Pelosi's plane like out of the sky? Or that, I mean, yes, they're doing very, very serious drills and, this sort of like show of force right now, but I don't know. I'm a little skeptical of that view that like this was gonna start an immediate conflict. I mean, I do think like obviously it shows a really like however the Taiwanese people feel, I think it shows a total like lack of disregard for their safety. Like supposedly we're like there to spread democracy to them, but I mean, however much the US might be the biggest aggressor in this whole situation and just on the global stage in general. I mean, I wouldn't want China shooting missiles into the water surrounding my island. I would be fucking terrified. Another thing, I mean, I just wanted to throw in there, like, I mean, I don't have very much knowledge of the history or like this part of the world, but Taiwan, I mean, I know they have a very, very strategic geographic location, right? As we've covered. And yes, they supply like the chips and everything, or a large portion of them. But my understanding is that their economy is like extremely dependent on mainland China. No? Like, so I mean, I think, it's like so easy to see through. Like, I just can't believe people are cheering this on.
No, I agree. I think Kenny's right. I think it's related the elections. I think it shows strong support. I predict, I may be wrong, but I don't like to predict, but we're going to have another Democrat in the House, in the White House. What I'm trying to make the connection. I was thinking about this is about monkeypox and everything, because I think COVID has really Pavlov conditioned us to obey the government, to be able to support the government, to not question the government, to trust the government, the U.S. government. I'm speaking about the U.S. American people here. And so once we saw how the USA was able to support Ukraine with most of U.S. Americans supporting behind it, right? It just went from like COVID, learning how to trust the government, to trust the government again with this. And I see this pattern where the government is saying, well, these are the reasons why you have to obey us. And this monkeypox thing, right? Like monkeypox is endemic to the Congo area. And never has there ever been a strategic way to vaccinate everyone. They have had ways to deal with it there. And I'm not saying it's the best medical system. What I'm saying is, if the WHO was really interested, the World Health Organization, I'll make the connection a bit, but if the World Health Organization was interested in eradicating monkeypox, it would have done it already. It has already existed before. And now suddenly COVID, being as most people are now seeing, it's like, oh, well, it's something that we have to live with. Another scare to make sure that we jump into this digital capitalism, to make sure that we are controlled. And Nancy showing, well, look at China. They're the ones who actually are the ones who are surveilling their people. We don't do stuff like that, right? China's been known for their censorship, their surveillance, their way of their authoritative way of dealing with people during COVID lockdowns. And just even before that, with tons of cameras, they've been known for that. And suddenly for Nancy to show we're very different from them. We are defenders of democracy. We're going to defend Taiwan. We are different from China in the way that we treated the whole COVID narrative. And we are, we have to make sure that we fight any virus that's going to come over. So we're going to support the WHO in their way of vaccinating everyone. So I think everything's connected, and we're going to be in support of this, I would say, invasion of Taiwan from our part, not from China's part, our invasion of Taiwan, because we have to support the government. We have to support them, right? That's what we've been taught this whole time during the pandemic.
Okay, just one thing real quick I wanted to add, not that this is really central, but just in terms of the election thing and what you guys said about kind of like having it their way in terms of the move, the power move or whatever, but also like covering their ass for the upcoming elections here. I do think it's worth noting Biden's had COVID for like 2 weeks or something now, right? After how many shots has he had now? Like 4 or 5? I don't even know. And I mean, whatever, maybe it's a coincidence or whatever, but it does, like, it reminds me of like during the lead up to our last general elections, right? Like he was constantly like in the basement, like, oh, he can't come out or whatever because of COVID. And it does seem like a very convenient kind of sidelining. That's just very well timed. And I think like a lot of I was thinking kind of in light of what you said, Eduardo, about the Chinese response, and even just like during Pelosi's visit, right? Like they're all masking. Like she even gave like the speeches in a mask. And again, like I don't really see that as super central. Like I think it's really more about the geopolitics, like we're saying. But it's all related, right? And the other question I wanted to bring up, I'll just throw out there really fast, is like I'm curious what you guys think, like how far ahead is China really, like in terms of their like 4R technology and everything? Like I know like obviously like this is a huge threat in terms of world power, multipolar worlds, and a lot of the surveillance techniques. But I don't know, like sometimes I don't know what to believe. Like I've been to China, but not in like a decade. And I'm curious kind of what you guys think, like, is a lot of that stuff blown out of proportion? And how does that kind of play in?
Again, a comment about this mask performance by Nancy Pelosi, like you brought it up, Jessica, that is just very curious because when Biden went to Saudi Arabia to fist bump the Saudi prince, like he wasn't wearing a mask, and a lot of people weren't wearing masks. So it's very selective, right? And like so I remember looking into what the vaccination rate in Saudi Arabia or whatever. But going back to your question about China, um, I think it's a fair thing to have doubts, right? Because like it's hard to decipher what the fuck is going on. What I do think is that China had to do a big leap technologically, right? Like they had to catch up, in a short period. So there is a technological leap in terms of what I understand, and like because it's happened like in countries where like they didn't have to lay down cables for phones, right? So they just installed towers. And so in modernizing or creating these cities, they have had that opportunity because they don't have to deal with old cities, and they've had to think ahead in order to catch up, and they've caught up, financially, economically, very fast. And I've heard and I've read some stuff. I think it's about, for example, automation, that in terms of automated cars, China is being far ahead. The US played catch up, and actually like COVID helped the US catch up. And I suspect, for example, that was why COVID was so useful for the US and like the West. Like in San Francisco, like empty streets. What would you think they fucking stop, rolling out the cars, the automatic cars over here and learning without people? Like that's something just as basic as that. But so I do think China is ahead in some areas, and militarily not quite yet. That's what I think they still need Russia, and that's what the US is going after both, because they know that alliance, is a threat to the hegemony of the US, in the future of capitalism, and they need each other. Like Russia needs China and China needs Russia, and that's why I make that connection of the geographical attack on both sides. Like if you look at the world map, Ukraine from the west, right, like it's getting pushed. The NATO, the US is pushing that way, and then from in the east, in the Indo-Pacific, they're pushing, through Taiwan, and it may not materialize right now, but I think like I think the US is betting on something, there geographically, because, and that's why I'm a materialist, right? Like forget all fucking technology, forget software, forget all that shit. If you're not transporting raw materials, from faraway lands, to create semiconductors, if you don't have the naval capacity to protect those shipments, what good is your technology? Like, and so, there is space stuff and blah, 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 but that's why I put emphasis in the geographical aspects of it. And I do think there is some, like in terms of surveillance of people, yes, hell yes. And it's not all of China, it's certain regions of China, that have this mass surveillance and the social credit systems where some people can move if you do something against what the state, but I am careful to bring that up at times, because people then that leads to, oh, look at what they're doing over there, when we don't see what it's happening to us in that same way, in a similar way, not exactly the same way, but we are going through that process too of being surveilled, because we've talked about the fourth industrial revolution. And like, and also, like, to me, it doesn't matter as to like who's more advanced, because they have the highly destructive, it's like, oh, who has the biggest military, because once they engage in a zero sum game, like it's zero for everyone. I think, if it escalates, it gets out of hand, especially when we've talked about automation of systems, right? Like, that is what I think I think we've discussed it, in terms of, Russia having to automate their defensive response. If Finland, if Sweden and Ukraine are encroaching into their territory and they have guns pointing at them, then, a false move and then some shit gets out of hand. And it's going to have to happen on China on the other side, on the east, right? If Taiwan gets closer relationships with the US and suddenly, so China's going to have to automate their shit. And so, like, everyone's pushing forward. I don't think it matters so much as to what degree, who's higher than someone else, because like I think that the technological capacity to destroy the goddamn world or make it very difficult for life to exist here is there if shit gets out of hand.
Can I just say that Finland and Sweden has just joined this week? The Senate, the Senate has just voted this week 95-1 for Finland and Sweden to join NATO. So it's, just what you were talking about, Kenny. Just wanted to mention that little quick fact about this week in the USA.
But first off, the 95-1, was that a US thing or a Finland-Sweden thing? Vote.
It was US Senate votes 95-1 to allow Finland and Sweden to join NATO.
Oh, okay, gotcha. Okay. Well, so first of all, I think the question you're asking, Jessica, is one I don't think any of us know. I personally, if you ask me just to make an assessment of it based on what the US is doing, I think they are behaving like an empire that's been on the top, that is very afraid of being taken down and going to the bottom. And so I sense that they are worried about how developed the rate at which both economically, militarily, politically, that China is advancing. And I think that this move is calculated to bring Russia, or it's not, they know in doing this move with Nancy Pelosi that they are only cementing the relationship between Russia and China. I don't think they would want to do that, but I feel like it seems like they feel like they have no choice. They have to start this second front. And I do believe it's a war. And I believe the war is starting. It's not fully hot yet, but it's getting there. And it's certainly beginning to operate openly between proxies, where through proxies, US is going to kill Russians with Ukrainians, and the US is going to threaten China with Taiwanese. So my own personal feeling is that China is ahead of where the US would want them to be. And I think that the idea of the big data analytics collection, the fact that they have a social credit score that they can actually use on their population, the fact that they've gotten big swaths of Africa under their umbrella with the Belt and Road Initiative, and they're making inroads into South America. I think the US is worried that an emergent technology like AI could be a game changer. And at the same time, and I talked about that book, The Long Game. I'll show you here. Long Game. China is beginning to make moves to not just be ahead in the area of data collection, but catch up and maybe even get ahead of the US in terms of its Navy in that region and beyond, and in terms of projecting power. They're already ahead of the United States in terms of the number of their infantry, but they're not ahead in terms of aircraft. The number of aircraft carriers and Air Force and things like that. So so China has some work to do, but they're attempting to do it. What was I going to say about that? So I do believe that the U.S. is making moves out of that nervousness, and I do want to come back to the thing I always read, because when I go back to the 2018 National Defense Strategy, this is the last paragraph of the opening statement. Here's what they say: China is a strategic competitor. It's no longer about the war on terror. It's about China and Russia and North Korea and Iran. But here's what they end with in the opening page. And they're saying, here's the cost of not doing this strategy, this new strategy that recognizes that China and Russia are the problem. The cost of not implementing this strategy are clear. Failure to meet our defense objectives will result in decreasing U.S. global influence, eroding cohesion among allies and partners, and reduced access to markets that will contribute to a decline in our prosperity and standard of living. Without sustained and predictable investment to restore readiness and modernize our military to make it fit for our time, we will rapidly lose our military advantage, resulting in a joint force that has legacy systems irrelevant to the defense of our people. Now, they go on in there and talk about big data analytics and AI. That to me is some nervousness. That's in 2018. And I don't think things have gotten that much better for the US empire in that time. So that's what scares me, is that I do think the U.S. is like a wounded, hunted bear that has ruled the jungle or ruled its forest, and now wolves are starting to take it down, and the bear is trying to lash out. I know that bear is supposed to be Russia, so that's confusing, blah, 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 but that's my best, thing I can come up with. But
they're with nuclear weapons, though.
Right, but and be clear, every one of them thinks they can win with those nuclear weapons. So they believe they have a plan to win. Otherwise, they wouldn't be in the game.
Can I just throw out there, though, like, I don't want to like pivot too much to the Russia thing, because I know we've covered that more and we're focusing on China and Taiwan. But I don't know, just like watching the past couple months, it doesn't seem to me, based on my limited knowledge, like the sanctions on Putin and the endless, like, over the top anti-Russian propaganda and all of this is working. I mean, I don't know, like, Europe especially, right, is struggling, I would say, like, even more so than us, just because of, how the percentage of, in terms of their energy and food and all of that. But I don't know. I mean, I'm not saying, like, obviously a lot of Russians and Ukrainians are dying. Again, like, all the leaders hate their own people, or, at best just don't give a shit about them if they're collateral damage. But I don't really feel like Russia's like up against the wall right now. So I mean, I guess it just kind of supports your like flailing bear analogy, Andy. And I do hear a lot of like, oh, like, it's not working, what we're doing against Russia isn't working, so time to move on to China. But I totally agree with you that it's like, it's not like a separate thing. It's like another front in the same war. Go ahead. You look like you
Kenny will probably have something to say to this, but it's totally true what you're saying, Jessica. That war has not gone well. That proxy war has not gone well for the United States. Russia's ruble is stronger. Russia is in a better situation in terms of to weather the storm right now. Its NATO allies that it was hoping to marshal are all collapsing, and they're losing leaders like nobody's business. And militarily, despite all the fucking people who throw up their blue and yellow flags and say that Ukraine they are losing. They are losing badly. And the people who are dying are Ukrainian, and the military in Ukraine has been destroyed. The defenses that were built by NATO since 2014 and the United States are getting hammered. And Russia's taken losses, but not as much as the U.S. had hoped. And so what they're doing now is there's actually articles coming out that the U.S. is now saying, distancing themselves from Zelensky, and they're talking about forming better relationships with Poland and arming Poland, so that can be the new front when all of East Ukraine is taken over. West Ukraine represents a rump that can no longer you can't even operate on a front to fight Russia. Poland is now saying, we'll line up for that war. Come with us, NATO. Come with us, United States. We'll help you. This, I mean, again, it's the spreading war that we understand from world wars. But it's a result of the fact that Russia has actually made much more progress than, for all the talk of, they retreated from Kiev. The U.S. knew they had big defenses lined up, and Russia has taken them apart. And that's my read on it.
Yeah, I feel like it's been pretty obvious all along that Zelensky was always going to be eventually thrown under the bus. I mean, they can't even get the guy a fucking blazer or something. But just one thing to add, just on the tech thing, and then also connecting it to.
I have a question. Sorry,
yeah.
just a comment on the question that you had, because I've started to think that those sanctions were not directed at Russia. They were directed at cutting Europe from Russia. And those ties, because, for example, that German-Russian pipeline that's been, in the works. So actually, I think this is again, creating chaos to pick your fucking side because shit is coming, type of thing. So yeah, the Europe is suffering actually more than the Russia is, to my understanding. So again, I think this is the US is all right, buddies, pick your side because, winter is coming. And so, which shows you, right, the level of, if you believe that to be true, how the U.S. ruling class is willing to fuck you over, and make deals and then undo deals in order to make you choose, their side. They did it to fucking China, right? Post, blah blah blah. They did it to the Soviets, during World War II or post World War II. They're gonna do it to Taiwan. They fucking did it to Ukraine. They've done it to Latin America. And I think they're starting to do it to Europe. Because they're not allies. Like there is no, like we've talked about the anarchic competition in capitalism, right, among nations. That this pretense that that economic activity, right? This is one major disagreement with the world order people. That they have economic ties. It's like as if those things can fucking be broken at some point. Like in World War II, a lot of these fuckers had economic ties. They were gone. And even then, like investment banks were investing in fucking Nazi shit. So they don't care. Like they will pick where the money is at, And so, but again, I do think sanctions are about Europe. They're not about, Russia.
Pretty extreme, like some of the rhetoric coming out of the European politicians, like telling people like, oh yeah, you might want to like go forage for twigs to keep warm over the winter, like with a straight face. It's crazy.
And I know, Eduardo, you should get in here, but I want to add one thing to add what Kenny just said. Many people thought the dollar was going to fall, particularly when Saudi Arabia threatened to go, or has begun to say they're going off the petrodollar. I've heard that the propping up of the dollar has stayed strong, is in relationship to the fall of the euro.
Well, then what about the Russian currency, right? That Putin's going to have this new currency that sounds like it is likely to be way more stable than
the
dollar.
combined one with China and Russia.
Oh yeah, okay.
Yeah.
And that's
you're right.
And that's where I think that the U.S. has a weak hand, because when we bring in Saudi Arabia, into the equation, because Saudi Arabia has also flirted with the idea of, accepting Chinese, what is it, like the yen instead of the dollar for petroleum, and we saw Biden had to go to meet with this pariah, right? Like this whole thing that he was going to sanction. But I think, like Saudi Arabia is also playing both sides. It's like, we'll pick the winner here. Yeah.
And one last thing, I'm sorry, Eduardo. I think the U.S. is counting on instability in China and hoping that more of the kinds of those demonstrations that you saw, which were meaningful demonstrations when people were standing in front of banks and stuff like that, to try to say, no, you can't take all our money from us. We got to give it back to us. You can't just hold on to it. The U.S. is now counting, I think, big part on growing instability in China, them not being able to control their own population, and hoping to help ferment that. The very same response that I would actually support, and I do support. I do support the Chinese people fighting their government. The U.S. is also going to count on some of that stuff. In fact, I heard that the guy who went off, who really took all that money at that first bank, fled to the United States. They said, "Oh, we'll take you," because it led to huge problems there. But I mean, I just would say I support the demonstrations in China. The U.S. ruling class also does, for very different reasons. So.
I don't have much to say anymore, but I imagine anyone will ask here, what is the opinion of both of you, being that you both are socialists and that China is considered to be a socialist country? And that's going to come up in discussion. So I would like for both of you to respond to that, because our audience is aware that, I say it in the intro, socialist Andy Lipson, socialist Kenny, like, and I think we agree that we are anti-capitalist here, and we have differences on how we should, what would be next for us if we were to have a decentralized or a non-capitalist government. But if you both could respond to that, because our audience will say, well, this is a socialist country, maybe, what is the response to that?
Kenny, you want to go first? Well, first off, one of the areas that, because one of the reasons the left isn't going to put on their blue and yellow flags around this issue is the left has historically, and I'm now, when I talk about the left, I'm not talking about the Democratic Party, I'm talking about the revolutionary left, has historically saw the Soviet or the China as a degenerated worker state, a worker state that has gone wrong. They went too far capitalist, but it's still some version of socialism, because the state is attempting to distribute resources from the top. And because of that, the left will not fuck this one up as bad as they fucked over Ukraine, because they still think of China as socialist. What it means is the left that is opposing this war will actually support the actions that the Chinese are taking militarily and say they have the right to do that. Taiwan is part of China. That's what they'll say. They'll basically claim that no, Taiwan is part of China, and to give backhand support to Chinese imperialism. I don't care about Chinese imperialism. I'm in the U.S. I got to stop my country. But that is what and I would say that, first of all, so I think most socialists think of some version of socialism there. I say there has nothing to do with socialism over there. It's a complete capitalist system, which really is doing more successfully fusing the forces of the state with, to some extent, a private investment to really be a public-private partnership of perfection, really, that the U.S. is attempting to mimic. And in fact, that really is the form, state capitalism, state-run capitalism is the form that governments take in war, because they have to. They've got to stop their countries from producing cars, and you got to start making tanks. So we're going to take it over. So that China's just gotten there quicker. U.S. is going to catch up. And the conditions that are leading towards more and more World War III are producing the likelihood of public-private partnerships being more and more a feature of our own future. And most socialists, unfortunately, still believe that if you have a state that is distributing things and has socialists at the top, it's still some kind of socialism. That has nothing to do with socialism, zero.
Yeah, I agree. It's the same thing in the sense of that you call yourself a socialist doesn't mean you are one. You gotta look up the fundamentals of how society is organized, where power lies. I lived in Nicaragua, democratic Christian socialist, fucking bullshit. And I had proximity to some of the power, and how that was, there was no democracy. There was no, control of the masses, right? Democratically and input. And, they were in also, I don't think socialism / communism can be built from the top down. We have to learn, how to organize ourselves, run our societies together. It is not a dictation. It's not. We're not going to tell you. And I have other problems with the process of the Chinese history. The quote unquote communism, shit with the Cultural Revolution. That's fucking engineering a fucking society, just like the shit that I'm rejecting here with the fucking liberals and and shaming people into fucking no. You gotta learn it in the process of building. You gotta learn that it's beneficial to you. You don't have some fucking technocrat telling you that that this is good for you. That's no fucking different. And so I agree with what Lipson said. In terms of this fusion of the state, and the capitalists, right? And we're heading that way. When we talk about the UBI, we're heading to that shit. UBI is, universal basic income, right? That is gonna come, people call that shit socialism. Socialism is not a fucking handout, So I do agree with right-wingers where they are disdain, handouts. That's not what fucking socialism is. That's the bullshit that Bernie Sanders, Ocasio-Cortez see as fucking socialism. That's not what it is. And I wish I could tell you this is the fucking roadmap, but no, it's gonna take us building it and making fucking mistakes and learning along the way. But having a horizontal, distribution of power, not vertical like it is in China, like it is here. So it's not. I absolutely don't agree. It is state-run capitalism. That's not different than Soviet. The Stalin experiment. That's not. You know what? I'm not gonna fucking defend that bullshit. And a lot of people do defend, this shit as being socialist. But if you look at the fundamentals of what makes a socialist society, is there fucking democracy, in the class, from the base. Do workers run shit? Do people run shit? Not again technocrats, not bureaucrats. Can you actually, because we will have leaders, can you actually hold them accountable? So it's not. Hell no. And I am tired too. So many people adhere to that ideology, and they're very easy to persuade to accept imperial projects. Again, going on the side of China, in this war, so they can go after Taiwan and all that bullshit. So no, again, it's not socialism. It's not communism. It is a dictatorship, but again, I don't want to use that to say that we are not, because I don't see democracy anywhere in this fucking world. I don't, it's just that it looks different for us, and we keep getting brainwashed, and we have been brainwashed, because I actually talked to a coworker recently, 3 coworkers. We started talking about Ukraine thing and stuff, and talked about the World War II, and the big default was like, oh, Putin is evil, and it's like this notion that these people are more evil than our representatives, that they are more deranged, that those dictators, that they are dictators, but we are not. We are a democracy, and I invite people to show me where has there ever been democracy in this fucking nation, for example.
Yeah, I just want to add, I'm so sick of having the conversation with people about fake socialism. I'm not even a fucking socialist. And I just had this conversation this morning about fucking Bernie for like the billionth time. Like, all you got to do is look at that vote that Eduardo referenced, 95-1 in the Senate, right, to expand NATO. Guess what? Bernie Sanders wasn't the one, right? He was not that one. That was a fucking Republican. And I do worry though, because on the right, I mean, now I'm living in a pretty right-wing town, and the anti-China sentiment on that side of things is almost as bad as the anti-Russian sentiment currently on the left. And so if this escalates, which it is, it does feel in that sense, just, I mean, it's exhausting having the same stupid conversations again and again, but the narrative control is very, very real. And when it's coming from both sides, it is worrying. And especially like, I mean, the right has gotten more stuff correct than usual the past couple years, but they're very pro-military. I mean, they really are. Like, Jesus, we have fucking like military recruiters in my classrooms. Well, not literally my classrooms, but in the halls of our schools. And in terms of, just the whole patriotism, defense, like these just really skewed notions of democracy, like they're still extremely pervasive, and they look different on each side of the aisle, but they're not. Like, when it comes down to it, I mean, I could see both sides cheering for a fucking nuclear weapon to be detonated. It's not that far removed, especially like coming back to Kenny's earlier point about the geography and how important that is. Like, yeah, okay, China's military may not be like as far advanced as they want it to be, but I don't know. It seems, I mean, I'm not a military strategist or whatever, but it seems like if there was any aggression on their part, like perceived aggression, I mean, just because of the geography, like even if we're over in Taiwan, like exerting control, it feels like it wouldn't take much. Like, I mean, that would be how they would win, right? Which is not, obviously would be a loss for everybody.
Thank you, Jessica, for standing up for socialism, even though you're not a socialist. That helps. Honestly, it helps to kind of clear the way on that stuff. And that's a very frustrating conversation. That's number one. Number two, in terms of like, I do believe the danger is already still for the United States in that region. Like, China, giving China the opportunity to do the exercises they're doing only strengthens the ability for China to operate militarily as they have done. And one of the things I read from the Long Game book is the hypersonic missiles. One of the reasons they're so important is, and they believe Russia has enough and China has enough, is they believe that they can use those hypersonic missiles to sink the U.S. fleet in the Pacific, because they can't stop those missiles with the anti-missile thing. And that's something the U.S. is very worried about, is that they will not be able to project power at that point. So, like, again, that's some of the stuff that they end up talking about. There's one other thing I wanted to say. What was that in relationship to something? Oh, socialism. Like, and I want to add one more word to assessing socialism other than democracy, and I want to add that word freedom. And I want to ask, if people do not feel free under that system, then I don't like. I don't care if it, like, what I mean is it has to be, people have to feel free. And the left has avoided that word because they associate it with the right. And I think we can't, because freedom does matter. But it also matters about whether you get things right. Because Jessica, I really agree with you that the right is going to be taken advantage of for their anti-China in the same way that the left is getting taken advantage of around Ukraine and their fight for independence and the belief that they're fighting a Putin madman. And we can also see that in the pandemic. I found out the last Workers and Students for Choice person brought up the fact that Del Bigtree is basically saying that monkeypox is real and that monkeypox is coming from gay people, and for that reason, there's a justification for some of the state restrictions that are going on. And he's actually saying, maybe gay people should just kind of chill out for a while so we can escape from monkeypox. Like, that shows you that if you don't get your political ducks right, because I agree, I think Del Bigtree has done a lot of good work to expose what's going on in COVID. But now they were able to say to him that there's something that gay people have that can spread. And I think because of some conservative bullshit that's running around in his head, they're getting over on him. And so there's no free lunch. These people will use every one of our political weaknesses in which we don't actually have solidarity with one another to grow divides.
Well, I haven't heard that I missed the meeting this week. But that's not super surprising to me. And just, it's a little side note, but I think a lot of that, like, not so latent anymore homophobia on the right is like coming from like the whole neoliberal, like LGBTQ plus ZW, whatever, all of the identity politics, like it's somehow getting like thrown into that whole discussion. Not that that's an excuse, but yeah, I see. I could see him kind of falling for that. He's been good on COVID, but his politics.
And, like I guess in my head, like I said, that we're heading to a similar place where the Chinese people are, like the workers are, in terms of surveillance, dictations, and I think there is this collective arrogance that is manifested to this notion of progress, right? Like as we've evolved, that we have higher values, higher ideals, more awareness, blah blah blah. What I see happening will be a display of this quote unquote backwardness, when we're pinned against each other more and more, because I see a similarity again, going back to Nicaragua. I heard stories of people where they were afraid of their neighbors because they would snitch on each other, and so, this homophobia, this racism, sexism, all this shit is gonna resurface again, because people are gonna be afraid of each other, and that's what they're doing. Literally trying to scare the fuck out of us. They did that through the COVID, the pandemic, through the vaccine mandates. People turn against their fucking neighbors, people they trusted, right? Organizers turn against organizers, and people who had trust built on in the trenches, right, of doing shit, going through life, building community, they turn against each other, so I do think, there is validation in terms of the people who look at, oh, Stalin, yeah, fuck that shit. Yes, absolutely. Look at China. Yes, absolutely. But don't for a fucking second think that it's not happening here, and it's not going to happen, and it's not going to grow. Because, we've talked about, in terms of, what was that Supreme Court Justice, Brown?
Ketanji, Jackson Brown.
Yeah, that is not about eliminating racism or sexism. That is actually instigating shit. The same thing, earlier we talked about resources, we talked about the South. This shit, everything that we're talking about also doesn't just involve the US, doesn't just involve China. It involves Africa, it involves Latin America, because guess what? The Southern commander, of the US forces, she's a woman, right? And she talked about Latin America having 60% of the world's lithium, right? She talked about Latin America having 30% of the world's fresh water, right? This is a woman a boss lady in a position of power. So they're gonna use this shit, and then there are people who will have these preconceived notions, but they will associate bad things with people in positions of power that happen to represent a group. So this shit will come back. We're not evolving. We're not past the bullshit. Because it can be exploited. These divisions and people like the one you mentioned, who I don't know who the fuck he is, but will fall for that shit, just like fucking Noam Chomsky did, right? This fucking intellectual giant, right, that people revere, especially in the liberal left. He was a fucking pushing for fascist shit, for putting people in internment camps, basically, who didn't get vaccinated, right? So it not just regular people will be had by these narratives, pitting us against each other. Especially, I actually think, because I've been that person who's been saying that the most educated are the most indoctrinated, easier to manipulate.
Then just one thing that just came to mind. I don't know. Also, I feel like all I've done is just side notes today, but just like the thing you were saying, kind of about Kenny, about how like we think we've progressed and we really haven't, just especially in terms of anti-imperialism. Like we just fucking drone striked the alleged, another alleged 9/11 dude this week or however long recently. I thought we pulled out. Like, were we supposed to have pulled out, right? So it's just, I don't know. I guess it doesn't like directly connect, but it's just, it's just more lies, and and obviously the whole 9/11 narrative is a great example of that. But like nobody blinks an eye. They're like, oh yeah, just drowned him. What? Like, I thought this was like the one good thing that Biden did, right? Like, pulled out. We're not gonna fucking drone people anymore. Nope. Like, it just baffles my mind that anybody trusts a word that our leaders say.
And I think you just mentioned another group of people that I would say have also been had, right? People who were like, oh, this 9/11 thing doesn't add up. But then the COVID narrative took root. Like, the government is incapable of a fucking massive lie, right? Like, this lie is way too big, right? But, there is no connection to that. It baffles my mind, the people who were, alive during that time. Then we know for a fact that we were gaslit, we were fucking lied to, we were thrown into a war. A lot of money exchanged hands. It was not beneficial to the workers at all, and yet here we are again, like another massive event, also around, a very tumultuous economic time. People forget the .com, bust, and then 9/11 happened, and then this shit happens, and so I'm a conspiracy theorist, I guess.
Yeah, I think we've said enough. I mean, it's all related. I don't feel like I articulated what I really, the whole monkeypox thing, when the relationship, I don't know if I made the connection. I was just trying to say similar to what you all had said, which is, like, it's about elections, it's about obedience, it's about censorship, it's like that's coming up with another scare, right? So that's why it's important to mention it. And even though it's already existed, I didn't know that about the political conservative views of that guy, and I really, it's kind of glad you brought it up. But if anyone could be tricked, you see, whether it's on the right or the left.
Yep.
That does it for this week's episode. What's Left is a weekly political podcast / channel challenging the mainstream left. We've posted information about our topics and our guests on the episode notes, where we found this episode, or on our blog at what-s-left.webnote.com. You can find past episodes to this podcast / channel there and connect with us. I remind folks, if you like anything you have heard here, please subscribe, rate, view, turn on your notifications to any of our platforms on Spotify, iTunes Podcast, Stitcher, Google Play, Bitchute, Odysee, YouTube, Rumble, or Telegram. And you can find any of that in the episode notes or on our blog, which I just said. And if you would like to give us feedback about something you've heard or suggest something for us to cover, contact us through our blog or directly at our social media handles, mine, Instagram, at Don Eduardo Barca, Kenny's, at ZepDKE, and Jessica's Twitter, which is at JHomie89. And one more thing to mention, if folks are interested, I've been here in Colombia now for 3 months, and I'm about to complete the 3rd month. So if anyone is interested in knowing more about what we've discussed, I will be doing a bit more extensive conversations and interviews with folks from here on my own channel, which I dreaded doing, but I will be doing it because I have stories to share with folks that are migrating from here, from Colombia to Spain, to the USA, and I want to follow their stories. I think it's very important, it's very relevant. We could do something else on Venezuela some other time. Another socialist country, so to speak, but isolated, and sanctions that are imposed on people, which is the reason why people are really migrating, and it's the people who are hurting. And so I really hope that people could follow those stories. I will be sharing it both in Spanish, English, Spanglish, and let's see if I'll do it in French as well. But most importantly, I think it's important for folks to do it, for people to listen and to really to have their stories be told. I want their stories to be told more than anything, more than what I have to share. And so I hope folks could please help and migrate over to that channel and possibly donate. I will put a link at the bottom for anyone to donate for people's voyage, their journey up north, because it's really important. Anyhow, thank you for that selfish time of mine. And we'll see you all next week. I'm Eduardo Barca with co-host Jessica, Kenny Cepeda, and Andy Lipson. Thank you all very much. Ciao. Thank you.